Well, we're so pleased that you're here to talk about activism outside the classroom because this moment is special. It's unique. The wave of teacher protest, the teachers' revolt that we've seen in the last year is unprecedented in American history. The Atlantic recently captured this in an article titled, "America's Teachers Are Furious." So I'd like to start there by asking you about that fury and where it comes from in your particular schools. Rodolfo?
There's just several issues. Class sizes, especially it's interesting how they separate it into different categories. Like English and math, they tend to cap some classes, but in other subjects, in the beginning of the year, I had 52 students in my classroom.
52 students
Right.
in one classroom.
And the administration was scrambling to figure out how to lower my class size, but I've had friends that teach foreign languages, and they're like, 50 is an average. Biology teachers, 50 is an average. Technology, the lack of resources. It seems like the whole system's hemorrhaging, trying to figure out, each administration is trying to figure out, how am I going to bring resources to the school? How am I going to be able to use some money for this and use some money for that? Mental health is a huge issue with our students, and I feel like a lot of those students, there's just not enough. We have one psychiatric social worker for our school, and it's always constantly whether we're going to have that psychiatric social worker for 2 days, 3 days. We have nurses for 3 days.
And how many students in your school?
There's 1,400 students in my school. So really, imagine not having a nurse. What are you going to do if there's an issue that comes up and somebody gets sick? And even psychiatric social workers, where there's one, and we have a psychologist. And so our students, sometimes I hear numbers of 400, 500 students that are in crisis at times, and what do you do with that? And so there's just so many issues, so many issues in our schools.
I would have to say that we probably our pay raise. We hadn't had a pay raise in over 10 years. I personally went to the same elementary school that I teach at, so seeing the changes over the time from when I was there and having my own child and wanting her to go to the school that I went to and not wanting to put her there. We were a demonstration school. We were the top of the line, and now we just fit the mold of every other school. And so our school went from 120 kids to, I think we have almost 500. It's just lack of funding, no budget increase for over a decade in Oklahoma.
Oh, Aiden?
Yeah, I would second all those things. I mean, when we're talking about class sizes, all of that is also happening in my context. In Arizona, we're $1 billion underfunded from 2008. So in 2008, our school system was actually $1 billion ahead of where it is now. And so systemic and systematic underfunding of our schools is why I'm doing this, because I work in a high-needs school with kids who live in poverty and have a lot of needs. Mental health, it's huge. It's a crisis. Our student-to-counselor ratio is the worst in the nation. A counselor cannot work with over 750 kids. It's illogical. So all of those things contribute to what we saw happen across the nation.
Mm-hmm. So Heather, Oklahoma teachers walked out about a year ago and were on strike for 9 days.
Yes.
I think we have a picture that we'll put up of that. You organized a 110-mile walk to the state capitol.
Yes.
What motivated you to do that?
I'm very fortunate. I complain about my school. We complain about it, but I'm also really big into our teacher union and going to meetings and hearing what other teachers don't have, and knowing that I have the time because I'm so fortunate at my building, and we have a great community, great parents, great PTA that most schools don't. So I had the extra time to be able to take out of my day and do this for them, but also for my daughter that would be coming up and everybody else's children that are there.
And Aiden, in Arizona, the Red for Ed teacher movement started shortly after the Oklahoma strike. We also have a picture from Arizona. What was your motivation to get involved?
The things that I mentioned before, and I think in addition to that, I'm not I'm not the president of our association, and I'm not, there are a lot of people in Arizona who are doing amazing things and really working on policy work, and I just admire what they are doing and the voice that they bring to this conversation, and I wanted to be a part of that. Ultimately, when we went to the Capitol, we went with 75,000 people, and we stayed overnight, and we were in the gallery, and we were meeting with our local representatives. And my legislative district is much smaller, but I felt like someone needed to be there to speak to our specific city and our specific district. And so I went so that I could speak to the senators who live in my town and say, hey, I work in your district, and this is what's happening, and this is what it looks like on a local level.
I read that one lawmaker you approached told you, quote, "You don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah. Yes, and I reached out to said lawmaker 2 times leading up to this event to get comments. What are we doing? How's the budget looking? All of that, and there was no reply. So that kind of tells you what his opinion is of teachers. And they just have this perception that educators don't know what it takes to fund schools or to make schools function. And that is crazy because I've been working in a school for a decade, and I think I do know what it takes to run a school.
Right, so that comment just fueled your fire.
Thank you.
Heather, you also went to the state capitol. How did that go?
Actually, the day we walked in, it was disheartening. It's very, we've walked 110 miles, and they weren't there. They left early that day.
What?
Yeah. So it was heartbreaking. Not everybody, of course, the ones that are on our side were there to welcome us in, but the ones that you really wanted to see, say, this is what we're willing to do for our students, what can you do? They weren't there. So it was very heartbreaking.
Just a reminder that in a moment we'll be taking questions through Slido, so please type them in and don't forget your name and organization. Rodolfo, the Los Angeles teacher strike was more recent. We also have a photo from LA. What is it about your personal story that drove you to want to fight for your students?
I'm a product of LAUSD schools. I think that it was just a natural progression for me. Like, I've been involved since high school, I've been involved with community organizing, and there was a specific law, Proposition 187, in 1994, and that's when I became politically active. And
that was an anti-immigrant ballot measure.
Yeah, but it's just like I survived the school. Like, I could say survived like LAUSD, and the conditions were just as horrible as they are now, or even worse, right? And so I think that it was just natural. Like when I was a kid, unfortunately, I lost a brother and a sister to gang violence, and there was no one there to there was no grievance counselor. There was no one there to guide me through that process.
That's so sad.
And luckily we have some of that now, but I feel like there's still a need for that. So I've been teaching for 17 years, so I've seen the conditions, and I lived through the conditions as a student. And so it was just natural for me to go out there for my students and for, everyone else, but more than anything for my students, because I know how it feels like to be in that classroom. I know how it feels like to not have the resources. I know how it feels like to be a person, to be thought of as someone that is not equal. Like, I saw the inequality in our school system. And so it was just natural. It was natural.
Speaking of students, how have your students responded to the activism they're seeing all around them now?
I'll answer that one. So I'm privileged to be able to teach high school, and I have freshmen and seniors. And Arizona is a conservative state, and so the conversation about politics in schools is a really touchy subject. And during the walkout and Red for Ed, that was it was really hard to talk about what we were doing, why we were doing it within the context of we're doing this to advocate for you as our students. But this year, I still have those same kids, and they're still in school right now. And I asked them, if I should come here to this event, and they were like, yes, 100%, you should do it, you know.
good.
And they've been writing in their senior portfolios, and I've had a couple kids mention in their writing that they see me as a role model, someone who's advocating for them. I've had a couple of kids say that they want to go into educational policy or be advocates in their own right, and they're seeing advocacy all around them, not just in the field of education, but if you think about like March for Our Lives or DAPL, and like there's a lot of advocacy happening. And so I think that it's really, they're ready to talk about it. It's the adults who aren't ready to talk about it.
Good point. I wonder if we have any audience questions yet. I don't see any. No? Okay, we'll come back to you. Would you encourage your students to go into teaching as a profession?
I think yeah. Like, I think education is great. I came into education because of the educators that I had, and it gave me some sense of hope. So I think the students, I have great students that I could see them in the classroom, that I could see them leading the classroom. Now, a lot of students, like, they see the conditions, are like, Mister, I don't want to be a teacher. Like, I don't want to have to deal with all these things, all these issues. But yeah, I would definitely encourage them. And I think, to pass the torch so they can continue. And some students have that passion. Some students teach me. And I see the great skills that students have. So definitely I would encourage teaching.
There are also some unique racial dynamics in the LA school system. Can
Right.
you tell us about that?
So I think it's interesting because the generation that I grew up with, I saw the shift in LA. Predominantly, I remember growing up, I had predominantly white teachers, but as my generation got involved politically and we went to education, I noticed a lot of my friends, a lot of people I went to school with got into education. And so we have a lot of Latino teachers, and I feel like a lot of students kind of could see role models in them. I have tons of friends that are teachers, and I always pay attention to the way their students look at them and how and so it's just like LA. I think from what I've never taught outside of LAUSD, but from what I hear, that's particular to.
It's rare.
Yeah, it's
It is
rare. It's
rare.
not something you see.
So we're going to turn to Slido. Are there any questions that the audience would like to ask? Oh, okay. Let's see. LAUSD had a 3-track system. Some counties had a 4-track system. So overcrowding and underfunding has been an issue for decades. What makes now different?
I feel like it's interesting, right? Our schools used to be like jam-packed. I remember when I started at Wilson High School, we were about 4,000 students, right? And we're down to 1,300. And what's interesting is we've lost a lot of students to like charter schools, right? But the conditions are the same. So we had like A, B, and C track, right? And it's interesting seeing that. Like, you would think that if a school gets smaller, the conditions would get better. You have, smaller class sizes and more room, right? Now what's happening is that you were having like charter schools saying, oh, well, there's some open space, let's co-locate. And, they passed legislation many years ago, and they were planning for this. And so it's interesting seeing the dynamics, because you still have these conditions, even though we don't have like ginormous schools anymore. You still have ginormous classrooms. You have big classrooms, and you have a lot of students.
Overcrowded.
Yeah,
Still
overcrowded,
overcrowded conditions. Okay, another question. This is from Sean at Diverse Charter Schools Coalition. With the work of education reform being so politically polarized, what is the road to having more bipartisan efforts for educational equity?
I'll actually answer that. This past weekend was our delegates assembly for our state union, and we had a new business item to actually have a Republican caucus, because we've never had one in our union. And so I think the organizations that are, or the large groups that are really behind the movement need to show that we don't just support one side. We support pro-education candidates. We're about pro-ed, not just blue or red.
Yes.
So I think that's the biggest thing that we need to do across the country is start voting for pro-ed and not voting straight party tickets.
I think I read in the information about Red for Ed out of Arizona that that was one of the top priorities.
Yeah, definitely. I think that after Red for Ed, that's one of the positives that we've seen in Arizona is we saw a lot of teachers run for office. And so actually our state superintendent, Kathy Hoffman, she's a teacher. And that's incredible because now we have someone in the Department of Education who knows what it's all about. And I think that that's what's going to lead to bipartisan policy when it comes to education is getting teachers to the table, no matter what their political leanings might be.
Okay, I think we'll just try to sneak in this last question. What role should administrators play in helping teachers' advocacy work and strikes?
Support.
Join us.
Yeah.
Join us and support us.
Yeah, join us.
Yeah. We've had great administrators in Oklahoma that support us, but definitely join in the efforts if you can. And but we know that you work 12 months out of the year. Also, just have our backs when we need to be gone.
And know that we're doing this for our students.
Yeah.
We're doing this because our systems have been drained. We're not doing this for ourselves.
No.
And I think that that was a little, people tried to get that misconception in there that the teachers are doing this for themselves, and we're not. I did not want to spend the night at the Capitol, but I did.
I didn't
because
wanna
I
walk
care
110 miles.
that my kids have access to an excellent school system.
Well, thank you very much. Please help me join me in thanking our panel.